We've got Debbie Winton joining us. So Debbie is going to talk a little bit about plastic pollution today. So as many of us know, there's definitely been an increase in plastic pollution with COVID, whether it's needles, whether it's masks. And unfortunately, a lot of these start on land and then make their way into our waterways. And there's a real untold threat to freshwater biodiversity that a lot of us don't really know about, or we don't really think about. So I'm going to bring Debbie in to join us in just a moment. Debbie is, let's bring her in. She's, there we go. There we go. Debbie, how you doing?
Hi, Jay. Right. I'm well, thank you.
Yeah, great. So joining us from RiverWatch, Debbie, it's an absolute pleasure to have you joining us today. I really enjoyed our test call the other day, and I got a little sneak peek at what you're going to share with us. So I'm looking forward to letting you take over for a little bit.
Great. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great opportunity to share the work that RiverWatch is doing. That's quite a big one to follow, difficult one to follow. So hopefully I'll do RiverWatch justice. There was a fantastic video shared there by Mark. So I'm just going to share my screen. So as Joe mentioned, I'm going to talk about plastic pollution in freshwater environments. If you just bear with me a second while I get my slides up. Sweet, there we go. So I hope everyone can see that. I'm sure Joe will let me know if there's a problem. So I lead the plastic pollution research program at RiverWatch Europe. And so just to introduce you to RiverWatch, for those of you who don't know, we're an environmental charity with science at our heart. We drive the change needed to live within our means and in balance with nature. And we do this in 3 ways: by connecting people with their natural world, by monitoring the health of our natural resources, and by informing the actions that will have the greatest positive impact. So we are a citizen science organisation who get people, the general public, businesses, and anyone who wants to be involved in scientific research towards critical environmental issues of our time. So we have 4 focus areas. The key one for the freshwater pollution programme is reducing pollution in our water bodies. We also have research projects looking at thriving places to live and work, enhancing the health of our coasts, and enabling sustainable agricultural land management. So to bring us to plastics and what is the problem, I won't spend too much time on this because I'm sure many of you know a lot of this already, but just a quick overview. Since the 1950s, when plastics was first invented, 8.3 billion tonnes of plastic has been produced. 50% of that has been produced in the last 13 years, and that production is expected to double once again in the next 20 years and to have quadrupled by 2050. Now, of that 8.3 billion tonnes that's been produced, about 6.3 billion is now waste. So only around 9% has been recycled globally. 12% has been incinerated, and that leaves 79%, which is either accumulated in landfills or just in the natural environment unmanaged. You can see this is a massive resource inefficiency, and with this mismanagement of plastics comes a lot of leakage into the environment. So it's estimated that around 8 million tonnes of plastic enters our oceans every year, and this is adding to the 150 million tonnes that's already accumulated in the oceans. And this year, as Joe already mentioned, plastic production and pollution has increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. Waste disposal systems have been overwhelmed in many countries, and there's been extensive plastic leakage into the environment. And 80% of the plastics in the oceans actually comes from the rivers, it's estimated. So it's likely causing untold levels of environmental damage long before it reaches the sea. So in rivers and lakes occupy less than 1% of the planet's surface, but they contain 25% of all vertebrate species. So this is obviously a huge threat to riverine and aquatic biodiversity. And more than half of all global river systems are already heavily affected by human activities. Species populations are dwindling rapidly. For example, up to 93% of migratory fish in Europe have been lost. This is down to a variety of impacts, including habitat loss, pollution, dams, overfishing, agriculture, climate change. They all play a part. And now we're starting to understand the extent of the threat of plastic pollution, which is thought of really as a new problem, but we were aware of it about 20 years ago, and the problem's been accumulating ever since plastic was first invented. And our knowledge of how plastic impacts marine biodiversity is growing relatively quickly, although it's still still a lot we don't know. The impact on freshwater species is relatively unknown. So what does this mean for species? Well, there's growing evidence on the interactions between wildlife and litter. So we know about entanglement, such as pictured here. These are the pictures that you often see in the media. Peer-reviewed research papers have covered accounts of more than 700 species and how they're affected by plastic. And alongside these kind of entanglements, animals are also ingesting plastics, often directly because it's confused for food. So turtles are known to eat plastic bags, thinking they're jellyfish. And this albatross gives a sense of how much can accumulate in the stomachs of these animals. So this is a juvenile Laysan albatross from the Cure Atoll, and this is in the middle of the Pacific, about as far away from major population centres as you can imagine. This animal never reached the sea, this bird. It died from a stomach bulging with 12 ounces of indigestible items, most of which was plastic. And a modelling exercise published in 2015 has predicted that by 2050, 99% of birds in the world will have plastic inside them. And if we take this into in the context of a predicted quadrupling of plastics production by 2050, this is a massive, massive problem that's only going to increase. It's not a faraway problem, and it's not a problem that only affects wildlife. It has the potential to seriously impact humans as well. Plastics are getting into our food, into the top predators, and into the food that we eat. So this picture is from a 2013 study of 500 fish in the English Channel, and they found that a third of the fish they studied had plastics in their stomachs. So this is just an indicator of how our food chain could be compromised in the future, even though the impacts of these pieces inside this fish aren't really understood yet. And the small fragments of plastics that have been consumed by this fish are termed microplastics. So these are pieces that are less than 5 millimeters in diameter. So microplastics, these come from two sources. There are primary sources where they're produced in the form of pre-production pellets or nurdles, like pictured here, biobeads, which are used in wastewater treatment, and microbeads, which are used in cosmetics. Then there are secondary microplastics, and these are generated from the fragmentation of larger plastic items. So every plastic item that enters the environment will eventually break down into smaller and smaller pieces to become microplastics. They don't degrade, they don't disappear, they just break down into smaller pieces. So back onto primary microplastics, you might be familiar with legislation in some countries that's banned microbeads in wash-off products. These can contain as much as 2.8 million microbeads in one 150 ml pack. But this is only a small part of the microplastic problem. There are still microplastics intentionally added to other cosmetics, but really they're a small contribution to this issue overall. Other contributions come from things like washing machines. So washing machines can produce, one wash can produce up to 700,000 microfibers in just one wash of acrylic clothing. And these fibers are so small, as small as, say, 2 microns, and they're entering the very, very base of the food chain. So zooplankton are eating these. So microfibers and microplastics in general are an issue for biodiversity because of their small size. They move through marine and riverine food webs following ingestion by zooplankton, invertebrates, bivalves, fish, mammals, and birds. And as well as the plastic accumulating in the stomachs of these animals, toxins and chemicals associated with plastics are also bioaccumulating. They adhere to the surface of the plastic or are present in the plastic on production, and they accumulate as well. And this contaminated food can ultimately end up on our dinner plates. And studies have reported that species exposed to high concentrations of microplastics display increased mortality, impaired growth rates, and reduced reproductive capacity. but we're really at the very beginning of understanding the impacts on species, the biological impact. So what are RiverWatch trying to do to tackle this problem? So the complexity, scale and urgency of this plastics challenge makes it something we need to tackle together. And we've developed our Plastic Rivers research programme to provide practical evidence-based steps to tackle the plastic pollution on our doorsteps, to stop it reaching rivers and oceans in the first place, so everyone can be a part of the solution. By stopping the plastic reaching our rivers, we can safeguard freshwater ecosystems and the oceans, protecting human health and wildlife for the future. So back in 2019, working with Plastic Oceans UK, we produced a report on freshwater plastic pollution. Our study reviewed 9 studies documenting a total of 72,000 plastic items to identify the top 10 consumer plastic items that are most commonly found in freshwater environments in the UK and the EU. So this is the Plastic Rivers report that we produced. From our study, we found single-use plastics dominated the top 10 items that were present, and particularly food-related and takeaway items. The study also made recommendations to individuals, businesses and policymakers on the actions that should be taken to stop these items from becoming plastic pollution. However, we also found there was a huge lack of data to help us understand the problem in greater detail at local, national and global levels. So our study therefore led to development of 2 citizen science research programmes that members of the general public or anyone can get involved in to help fill these gaps and better inform solutions. These were a plastic footprint calculator and an environmental monitoring project, which I'll talk about both. So plastic footprint calculator, this is a relatively new concept, but modelled on an existing tool, that of carbon footprint calculators, which you may well have heard of or even completed. So calculators inform people of, for plastics, their plastic use, their level of use, what items they use the most, so their largest areas of consumption. They might tell you how you compare to other people's or nationally. And they also often, so they provide actions and targets and recommendations to reduce use. So we produced a plastic footprint calculator for plastics on the go, because we focused on these items that consumers use on the go because they're the most likely to end up as litter or end up in the environment. So in addition to calculating how much plastic you use in a week, respondents are asked about any actions they already take to reduce their plastic use and what barriers they face in trying to do so. You can see an example question here on the right about food wrappers. So this provides us with insights into where consumers need further support to reduce their plastic consumption and who could help such efforts. So because individual behaviour change is not enough on its own, and a collaborative effort is required to make it easy for consumers to make the most sustainable choices and bring about wide-scale behaviour change. So this is the plastic footprint calculator webpage, and there's the web link there if you want to take a note, or just Google RiverWatch plastic footprint calculator, and it's still live. You can have a look there, and we're continually collecting and analysing this data. So it was launched in January last year. So we've got a full year of data, including data from before COVID and during all the different lockdowns and restrictions that governments have put in. So we've been analysing the data in relation to COVID to see how behaviours have changed during that time. And we're hoping to shortly publish a paper on that. And the second project is an environmental monitoring project. So while the footprint calculator is telling us how much plastic people use on the go, our river monitoring project RiverWatch is painting a picture of plastic pollution in river catchments at the moment across the UK to help us understand sources and tackle hotspots of plastic pollution. So it's based on our Earthwatchers platform, and this is the project site. Anyone can sign up to participate. There's no requirement for any prior knowledge or training. All the information on how to carry out the survey is provided on the project page. And so with gloves, a rope, some pegs and our protocol, people can become scientists and help clean up some of the litter as well. So it's win-win. So we use a quadrat survey method, and this is to standardise efforts so we can accurately compare between areas. Surveyors choose a 5 metre stretch of riverbank anywhere, any river, any place near them, and they survey a 5 metre transect within 3 metres of the river's edge. At one end, they pin out their first quadrat of 1 metre by 1 metre and find and record any litter that's present in that quadrat. And then they move along a metre. The process is repeated until 5 quadrats have been completed. And this method really captures 2 sources of litter, so litter that's been dropped on the riverbank and also litter that's being transported downstream and deposited on the riverbank during periods of high river flow. And from the data that's provided from these 5 metres, we can extrapolate the results to estimate the average litter concentration per 100 metres square of riverbank for that location. So this is just some examples of people carrying out a survey. You can see a quadrat pinned out here, the different types of riverbanks that people are surveying. Surveys record plastic and non-plastic litter, and this helps provide data on how much of the litter on riverbanks is plastic. So from our plastic rivers study, this is thought to be around 71% on average, but this is going to vary greatly, very hugely between locations. So it's really important to get this kind of local level information. So once they've, while they're collecting their data, there's we have an online survey portal which is mobile friendly. So the survey form can be completed while you're at the survey site, so at the time of data collection, or there is paper forms that people can complete and then upload their data later on at a computer. It's really simple, really simple form to follow. So what's being found? Well, we actually piloted this project before we launched it nationally. We piloted it for a year, funded by SC Johnson, working with 2 community groups in a small area of the UK. And they did 33 surveys in 4 rivers over a few months. It's a bit less than we hoped because of COVID. The project was launched just before lockdown hit in the UK, and so they weren't able to get out and do quite as many surveys as they hoped. We still got a good amount of data, and the volunteers recorded 243 plastic items and 62 non-plastic items. So that worked out as an average of 7 plastic and 2 non-plastic items per survey. So to make that a bit more tangible, that equates to around 147 plastic items per 100 metres square of riverbank, and then an additional 38 non-plastic items. So one thing was immediately clear from this, that plastic items are much more abundant than non-plastic, with 80% of items being plastic. The most common type of plastic items they found were food-related packaging at 34%, followed by smoking-related items at 22%, and then plastic bags, 17%. So this is very much following, all these items are within the top 10 pollutants that we identified from our Plastic Rivers report. And so the data is corroborating other studies and reports. Oh, excuse me, you're going too far. Other studies and reports, which basically suggest that activities eating snacks, drinking from disposable bottles, and smoking are all behaviours which lead to high levels of plastic pollution in rivers. Through the RiverWatch's RiverWatch project so far, it's only been running since the 1st of February, so we've got about 3 months of data. And 72 surveys have been completed, and they found 1,333 items. That's both plastic and non-plastic. This averages out at 370 items per 100 metres squared of riverbank, which is obviously much higher than we found during our pilot. It's more than double, but full analysis has not yet begun, and so I look forward to delving into these results to see what we're finding. And you can see a few of the items that people are finding on their surveys. So from the pilot study, we also looked at the sources of plastic pollution, and we're doing this through the RiverWatch's project. The sites that showed the largest amount of plastic pollution during the pilot were most often associated with recreational activities, fly tipping, and urban or road discharge as the likely sources. Other sources included walking paths, rubbish from cars, overflowing litter bins, traveller sites. And this is really important for us to know, as it shows us that for this particular location, recreational activities and fly tipping are important problems to focus on for action. So how are we going to use the data that's being collected? I've given a little bit of an indication, but with the data, we'll be improving our understanding of plastic pollution in rivers at national and local scales. After submitting their data, surveyors have immediately shown how the level of plastic pollution found during their survey compares to the average. So is it a low, medium or high level of plastic pollution? And over the next few months, we're developing a feedback page on the website to show live survey results, show where the locations, a map of locations where surveys have been completed, and show comparisons for volunteers to better understand what their data means in a wider context. This is all it's a beta website at the moment, so it's all just a trial. So we're improving it as we go along. The plan in the future, as we collect more data and when we have enough data, we'll be running action planning workshops, both online through webinars for national audience or international audience, and also in person when that's allowed for interested local groups who've collected lots of data in their particular area. During these workshops, we'll help participants use their data to locate hotspots of pollution, to identify likely sources of pollution, and to develop action plans to tackle the problems that they found. So with the community groups, their coordinators will support the volunteers to carry out their action plans, and we'll continue monitoring to see whether that actions have any impact in reducing plastic pollution. Hopefully they will. Eventually, all of the data collected through the project will be made open source, and we will be regularly reporting new insights, findings, and recommendations in a variety of different ways for different audiences, from social media and then publishing in scientific journals when we have relevant findings. And we will already are, seeking additional funding to expand or replicate this project elsewhere in Europe and beyond, and to further improve its impact. And at the local level, groups will be using the evidence that the evidence they collect through the Earthwatchers programme. They'll be able to use it as an evidence base for their efforts to help their communities go plastic free. So that's pretty much it. That's everything I wanted to say. I do have a video, just a very quick video about the Plastic Rivers programme. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for inviting me to present. I think Joe has this video, so I'll just end my slideshow there, and hopefully you can show the video.
All right, Debbie, thank you so much for sharing with us today. I always love to see citizen science projects. I think it's so important to get people excited, get them involved, put tools in their hands so that they can make a contribution and get excited about collecting baseline data, which is so important, and seeing how things change over time.
Absolutely, and citizen science has really evolved into moving into action-orientated solutions now as well. So it's not just about data collection, it's about how can citizens use the data they're collecting to help make a difference as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's grab a couple quick questions here from the Q&A. So Yen here is wondering about microfibers. Do you have any programs monitoring microfibers? We know we throw our clothes in the washing machine, tons and tons of tiny little fibers come off. Is that a project that's being looked at right now?
So we have one small project at the moment, which is we're designing a citizen science microplastic sampling method for fresh waters, for rivers in particular. And we're working with one of the local rivers trusts in the UK, the Wessex Rivers Trust, to develop that methodology. So that's at the very beginnings of designing that. But we're also looking at developing another plastic footprint calculator or tracker, looking at microplastic emissions from their home and helping people to understand how much microplastics their activities in the home, including washing, laundry and cleaning, and contribute to the microplastics problem. And then again, looking at how people can reduce, what actions they can take to reduce their emissions. So the outcomes from that would be twofold. We get a lot of data on what is actually the household, how much microplastic is coming from households, but also what are the sort of the best actions that people can take, and what are the most likely or easy ones that people can take that have the biggest impact.
Okay, so we're talking about freshwater, and we're talking about, it's that gateway, right? It takes plastic from further inland and takes it out into our oceans. So Julian is wondering about the effectiveness. There's different things people like to try to put at the outlets. There's some that kind of look like little water wheels almost, that kind of pick things out of the water, or more like a boom system. He's curious about the effectiveness of devices like that in rivers.
That's a good question. It's not actually something I've personally been involved in or done a lot of research on. I know that there's more and more innovations coming out to try and capture plastic in rivers and freshwater environments. I think a lot of them are highly successful, collecting up to 95% of the plastic that passes through that location. The various logistical issues with maintaining all of these different devices, and I don't think it's particularly cheap at the moment, and most of them are prototype stages. The wastewater treatment plants themselves, for the water that passes through them, technology is available to remove up to 95%, I think is the latest study. So it's a range, but up to 95% of plastics from the wastewater before it's then put into, emitted into the freshwater system. So technology there is also improving greatly as well. But whether or not wastewater treatment plants have access to that technology, there's very few that actually have the really high level removal technologies in place.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the tub and the mop analogy. Of course, it's important to clean up, but if your tub was overflowing, you wouldn't just mop, you turn off the tap. Yeah. So I think that's, as you kind of highlighted, we really need to look at those issues too, and turning off that tap. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stopping it from getting into the environment in the first place is really the key thing here.
All right. Well, Debbie, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for talking plastics. I mean, it's very topical, right? I mean, it's always topical, but with so much medical waste with COVID-19, I think it's something we'll be dealing with, kind of those implications for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. And there's the health impacts of that as well. So it's a lot more to look at, a lot more to worry about.
All right. But with RiverWatch, you're mobilizing a flotilla of citizen scientists who can get out, collect data, and see what's really happening out there.
Absolutely, yes. And this protocol, this method can be used anywhere in the world. It's not starting with the UK because it's a pilot, but it can be done anywhere. So
yeah.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, Debbie, thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of your weekend. Tune in a little bit. And thanks so much for being with us today.
I will, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Debbie.
Bye.